The parietal lobe of the cerebrum is located posterior to the frontal lobe of the cerebrum. It is comprising the top posterior portion of the brain cerebrum. So it's going to be like, this is the top of the head. So it's going to be like the top of the head and like in the back right here, covered partially by the parietal bone and partially by the occipital bone. So what is localized to the parietal lobe? So the cerebral cortex of the parietal lobe is involved in the somatosensory sensations. We feel lots of somatosensory sensations in the body. What does it mean? Soma means body, sensory means sensations, and so some of the sensations that we can feel pretty much like everywhere in the body will be touch, something coming in contact with our body, whether it is a light touch, tickle, or a pressure. It could also be a vibrational touch. So anything that comes in contact with our body is touch. We can also feel temperature. Something might come in contact with our body, like a physical object, or it could be chemical, like air. We can feel its temperature. Pain can be felt in everywhere in our body. Pain is caused by something that is damaging to our body tissues, like extreme temperatures could be damaging to our tissues, actual lacerations like cuts, bruises. There could be so many more, like hard touch, extreme temperatures. So something that is damaging to our body will be felt as pain. And also proprioception. Proprioception can be felt in a lot of places in our body, especially in our muscle and joints. And this is the information that our body receives about its orientation in space. We can close our eyes, but we can still know the position of our body in space. We can feel that we're sitting upright or standing upright. Maybe we are upside down. You can even feel the sensation of going up or down in an elevator or accelerating in a car or roller coaster. So if you close your eyes and touch the tip of your nose, the ability to find your nose is the proprioception. So all of these sensations can be felt in various parts of the body. They are detected by sensory receptors in the body, but then the sensory receptors are connected through nerves to this region of the brain where we actually perceive sensations in the parietal lobe of the cerebrum. In addition, there's going to be an area involved in a spoken language comprehension of, for example, like you're listening to me talking right now, and this area is making sense of the words that I'm saying. So spoken language area comprehension is located right around here in the parietal lobe, near the temporal lobe of the brain that we study next, I believe. Oh no, we're going occipital lobe first. So occipital lobe is the lobe involved in vision. This is the lobe in the back of the brain, in the back of the cerebrum. It's going to be right above the cerebellum, and it's covered by the occipital bone right here of the cranium. The occipital lobe has our eyes connected to it by the optic nerve. The eyes are eyeballs located inside of our eye sockets. Here's the right eyeball in this picture. And inside of the eyeball, there are special vision receptors called photoreceptors. We'll study them in chapter 17. So these photoreceptors are connected to the occipital lobe of the cerebral cortex. That's where we perceive pictures that our eyes see. And this is also where our visual memories are created. The next lobe is temporal lobe. This is the lobe around our ears. This is where the ear is. So it's going to be above and in front of the ears, kind of like behind the eyes. It's actually on the side of the brain. And this temporal lobe is involved in things that are actually detected by the structures in our ears because it's so close to the ears. So one of the things that our ears detect is sounds, which is known as hearing. The special sound receptors in our ears send this information to the temporal lobe through nerves. This is also where hearing memories are formed. For example, the memories of a certain melody of a song. This is where it is formed. In addition, our ears have special structures that detect balance of our body, and that is the information that is sent to the temporal lobe of the cerebral cortex. in addition, the balance memory is also formed here. So that way, when we learn to do something that requires balance, for example, walking like in a straight line without losing balance, that's not something babies can do easily. The babies learn how to do this easily. Like, I'm observing my baby doing this, and it makes me realize how many skills we had to learn that are second nature to us now. So this is where balance memories will form as well. In addition, temporal lobe has the areas for sound discrimination and recognition, so being able to distinguish between specific sounds, even the specific sounds that are made for words and letters, and recognize them, of course. And temporal lobes shares the spoken language comprehension area with a parietal lobe. It's going to be right here in between parietal. This is the boundary, parietal lobe and temporal lobe. So it's this spoken language comprehension area shared by these two lobes. The next lobe is called insula. Insula is depicted here in green, highlighted in green, and it's actually a lobe inside of a fold in a brain. So if we go back to one picture here, you'll see that between the frontal lobe and temporal lobe, there's actually a deep groove right here. It's called the, what is it called? It's called the lateral fissure. I'll double check that. And if you split that fissure, it's actually a really just deep fold. You can actually just separate it. You're going to get to kind of like a hidden lobe in the brain called insula, like the insulated hidden lobe. And this lobe is connected to the structures of our nose and ears that detect smell and taste. So smell and taste memories are formed here as well. Okay, so let's review the lobes of cerebrum. The largest lobe is the frontal lobe. Next, behind, posterior to the frontal lobe, is parietal lobe. In the back of the posterior portion of the brain, there is occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is right above the cerebellum. On the side of the brain, the lateral lobe is the temporal lobe. And if you separate the frontal and the temporal lobe through this through the slit right here, through this fold, there's going to be a lobe called insula. Oh, here we go. So these are the marks that separate the lobes of the brain. So between the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe, there is a deep groove called lateral sulcus. Between the frontal and parietal lobe, there is a smaller groove called central sulcus. This one right here. Between the parietal and occipital lobe, there is a small groove called parieto-occipital sulcus. And between the cerebellum and the occipital lobe, there's a very deep groove. It is called transverse fissure. So fissure indicates a much deeper groove between the parts of the brain. Sulcus it's a fairly small one. Next, we're going to review the functional areas of cerebrum in each of these lobes. So even though our brain has so many functions, each of these functions is localized to a particular part of the brain. How did people learn about which part of the brain performs which function? Well, they studied various brain injuries throughout the history of medicine and saw that if a person has a particular part of the brain damaged, they lose a particular function. So first is the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is this lobe right here. And it has 1, 2, 3 main functional regions. The most front anterior portion is called prefrontal cortex. The middle portion, highlighted in orange, is called premotor cortex. And the red highlighted area in the adjacent to the parietal lobe is called primary motor cortex. So what are these areas are for? So first of all, prefrontal cortex is the region of our intellect. So it's like the forehead will be right here. Oops, you can't see that. Okay, so the forehead will be right here. Okay, the eyes will be right here. This is where our eyebrows are. This is the eyes here, the nose. Okay, so the forehead, this is going to be the prefrontal cortex. It's involved in our intellect formation. That includes thoughts, that includes memory recall, that includes dreams, imagination. So sort of like the awareness of the world around us, and also kind of like the inner mind of our body. The premotor area, this orange one, is involved in the muscle memory. So it is basically remembering how to do certain things with your body. Once we do something, we can kind of repeat it better the next time because we have a memory of that. And if we keep repeating the same action over and over again, we're going to get like a really solid, clear memory of that, and it's going to become second nature. So premotor cortex is involved in that process. It has several important areas. It's got an area right here, sort of like in the superior anterior portion of it. It's called the frontal eye field area. This area is involved in the movement of our eyes. So scanning eye movements when we study something, we look at something, we read words. So the movements of the eyes here. This area right here, sort of like the inferior portion of this area close to the temporal lobe, is called the Broca speech area. And this is the area that's involved in a movement of the muscles that are involved in the speech production. So speech production involves the movements of the muscle, like the tongue muscles, the voice box muscles, but also the translation of our thoughts into words. So that's why this area is located close to the intellect area. So kind of like broader area right here is going to be the area involved in the speech production. Okay, so the last area of the frontal cortex is primary motor area, and this is the area that is involved in all of the voluntary skeletal muscle movements. So movements of the body that we do at will, like movement of our hand muscle when we're writing, walking, movement of our leg muscle, and so many more. Next lobe is parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is involved in somatosensory sensations, and it's highlighted here in blue and pink, all of this here. So it's got several important areas. The first one is the closest one to the frontal cortex, is this blue area called somatosensory area, and this is where the area of the general sensations, where the general sensations are perceived, like sensations of pain, sensations of touch, temperature, and proprioception. Other areas in a parietal lobe involve somatosensory association area. It's the recognition of the objects by touching them, not looking at them, but touching them. Common integrative area is the area that makes decisions based on sensory information. For example, we touch something and we decide, like, is it cold? Should I hold it for too long? Is it gonna like make my hand feel uncomfortable? Should I put it down? Is it pleasant? Should I keep touching it? There's so many decisions to be made about the sensory information. Pain, for example, will be should I address that? Does that hurt enough? Should I scream about it or cry about it? So it's everything decision. It's every decision that we make in regards to the sensory information that we receive. Okay. This area is also involved in a train of thought. So even though the frontal lobe is the intellect thought region, sometimes we can go on sort of like this little adventure in our brain, like when one thought leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. It's like this busy monkey inside of our brain that just keeps jumping from one thing to the next, and we kind of like lose track of reality in a way. It's like it's sort of like, I guess it could be like daydreaming in a way, but you can also get carried away on a train of thought, like when you're listening to me, for example, here, and all of a sudden your brain is thinking about something else, and then something else and something else, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I was getting distracted. So that's like a train of thought, but it doesn't have to be necessarily a distraction. It could be something that we intentionally do when we're brainstorming, and our brain just goes like on this little adventure in our head. Our mind is a busy guy or girl, and this area is involved, the common integrative area is involved in that specific train of thought. Okay. The last area is situated kind of like right here, and right here. 3 areas that work together is called the vernix language area, and this is the area of speech understanding. So we already talked about it, but it's actually not just here, it's actually here, here, and here. Okay. This area, interestingly, is localized to the left hemisphere only. So if you go to the same area in the right hemisphere, it's not going to be it's not going to have the same functions. So the understanding of speech comes from the left side of the brain only. Next is occipital lobe. And occipital lobe has this highlighted in green, has the primary visual area right around here. This is where the sense of vision, so this is where we see pictures that our eyes detect. And there's also a visual association area. This is where we actually have like sort of like the memories of things that we've seen. So this is where we can recognize an object by looking at them because we already seen them before or we've heard about them before. Temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is all of this right here. And this highlighted area is involved in, it's called the primary auditory area. So actually, if I go back to this slide, what I meant is, yeah, this is good. Okay, never mind. We're good. Oops. Okay, so temporal lobe. It's got the primary auditory area. This is where the sense of hearing is perceived. So we hear sounds in this area right here. And this is where we recognize sounds. And this is the area also involved in a speech recognition. So understanding the meaning of words, and also just the recognition of various sounds. Like you hear a sound of a dog barking, you know that's a dog barking because you've heard that before. So this is the area that is associated with auditory memories. Last lobe is insula, and insula has 2 main regions. The region more posterior, it's the primary gustatory area, that's the sense of taste perception, and the area more inferior, that is kind of touching the temporal lobe a little bit, is the primary olfactory area. This is where the sense of smell is perceived. So generally speaking, the brain has 3 categories of areas. All of the sensory areas in the brain, they receive information from the body, the sensory receptors, and create a perception, the consciousness awareness of those sensations, kind of like making sense of what we're feeling with our body. Like, we're feeling something is warm, or is it something cold, or is it something wet, or is it something that's hurting us? Motor areas. Motor areas control execution of voluntary movements. Basically, these are the areas that control our body's muscle. And association areas are the areas that carry integrative functions. That means the functions that sort of like exist just in the brain. They don't have to be coming from the body or going to the body like these 2 do. They just occur in the brain. So memories, emotions, reasoning, will, judgment, personality, and intelligence. Those are called association areas or integrative functions. Those are called integrative functions that occur in the association areas of the brain. So hemispheric lateralization refers to the separation of the functions in the right and the left hemispheres of the cerebrum. So we actually have 2 sides of the cerebrum, the left side and the right side. And the way they work is a little bit different from each other. So For example, left hemisphere functions are similar to the right hemisphere functions as far as where they're localized, but the way those functions are executed is a little bit different. So left hemisphere tends to be more analytical and precise, and right hemisphere tends to be more spontaneous and kind of like artistic and creative. However, they are interconnected, as you can see in this illustration, by little bridges. So they do influence each other, or they communicate with each other. So the left hemisphere doesn't always just execute functions without the right hemisphere. They kind of work together. And in different people, the left or the right hemisphere can be sort of like predominant in a way. So basically, the brain will favor the decisions of one of these hemispheres over the other. So they will both make some kind of decision, but collectively, like one of the hemispheres will be like more predominant in that decision making for the whole brain. And here's like a really cool diagram that I really like. It kind of like explains what the functions of these hemispheres are like. So this is the left hemisphere, the left brain, and you can see that it's very kind of like minimalistic and exact, as opposed to this very colorful abstract right brain. The left brain is the analytical brain. So I'm the left brain. I am a scientist. I'm gonna zoom in for you. I'm a mathematician. So the scientist and the mathematician of your brain kind of favors the left side of the brain. I love the familiar. I categorize. I'm accurate, linear, analytical, strategic. I am practical, always in control, a master of words and language. So actually the left hemisphere is the hemisphere that is, what is the word I'm looking for? Words, the hemisphere that uses words in language. So without this hemisphere, we're not going to be able to comprehend the meaning of words or generate words from our thoughts. Our thoughts would be kind of like abstract, more like in pictures. So like the left brain thinks in like words, numbers, whereas the right brain thinks in like pictures. Left brain is realistic. I calculate equations and play with numbers. I am order, I am logic, I know exactly who I am. Now let's compare the right brain. The right brain, I am the right brain. I am creativity, I am free spirit, I am passion, yearning, sensuality, I am the sound of roaring laughter, I am taste, the feeling of sand beneath bare feet, I am movement, vivid colors. So interestingly, the colors perceived in the right brain a lot more than in the left brain. I am the urge to paint on an empty canvas. I am boundless imagination, art, poetry. I sense, I feel, I am everything I want it to be. So as you can see, we definitely need both sides of the brain being in balance and giving us all of these functions in order to be a complete human. Okay, so here's a cool example that demonstrates the difference of how the right and the left brain function. So let's review the functions of the right and left hemispheric lateralization on the example of these two areas. This area right here, shared by the frontal. Oh no, that's not shared by the frontal. It's in a frontal lobe. On the side of the frontal lobe, this is called the Broca's area. This is the area that's involved in the speech formation. So translating our words into thoughts. And then in the temporal and parietal lobe, there's an area called vernix area. This is the area of understanding of speech. So as you can see, the translation of our thoughts into words happens in one area, and then understanding of the words, whether written or spoken, happens in a different area. Okay, so if there is damage to the Broca speech area, the person will not be able to form words, but the person has clear thoughts. This is called non-fluent aphasia. If there is damage in the vernix area, the person can still speak, but unable to form coherent sentences. Okay, this is called a fluent aphasia or word salad. So kind of like saying nonsense. Okay, if the speech area The speech area will be this area right here, Broca's speech area. If it's damaged in the left brain, the person is unable to understand. If the speech areas, both of these areas, are damaged in the left brain, the person will be unable to understand or generate a meaning of written and spoken words, resulting in a slow speech or word salad. Okay, if this area is damaged in the right brain, the person will be unable to understand or generate an emotional connection to the words or intonation, resulting in monotonous speech. Okay, so here you can see how the left brain is involved to the meaning of words, and the right brain is involved in the attaching of the emotional connection to words. That we absolutely need both of those for speech understanding and production.